name is Erin Ashley Simon. Welcome to Presence of Mind, Episode 3, The Demands of the Streaming Spotlight. And I'm joined today by two awesome guests who are going to do a deep dive into some mental health conversations. Today we have Dr. K, healthy gamer, psychiatrist, and streamer. And of course, we have Brian Kibler, game designer and streamer, joining us. Gentlemen, it's so awesome to have you guys here, and I'm super excited to have a full extensive conversation surrounding mental health with you all. What's the starting statement that you guys like to kind of top this off with before we get into the whole combo?
So I guess I just to kind of kick things off, I think that it's awesome that you guys that we're having this discussion. And I think it's great that Presence of Mind is sort of focusing on this because I think mental health and gaming is becoming more and more of an important intersection for streamers, for players, for just basically the entire industry. And I think it's an awesome conversation that needs to be had. So thank you very much for having us.
And Brian, what about you?
I definitely want to echo that. I think that mental health is something that for a lot of people in, not just the gaming space, the world in general is often overlooked. And I think, the challenges of 2020 and everything that's been going on this year has really caused a lot of people to refocus their attention on that. And if anything, that's one of the few good things to come out of everything that's happened in the world this year.
Yes, it definitely is. And for those who are new to this live podcast, Present of Mind is an initiative that brings C9 partner Kaiser Permanente's mental health experts and clinicians together with C9 athletes and coaches and staff and featured guests to proactively engage the community in mental health conversations. Now, before we get into the deep aspect of the conversation, I just wanted to say we want to give you guys a heads up in today's episode because we will be discussing suicide prevention and recent streamers' deaths by suicide, which may be triggering for some viewers. So just want to let you guys know. Also, throughout the entire program, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat section. Let us know, and we will make sure to ask the viewer chat questions throughout the entire program. Now, what are we going to be talking about today? So, the demands of streaming spotlight. You dive into the pressures of being an esports personality, and there's demands of being casters and content streamers, and demands that comes with just working in this industry. The conversation we will have will touch on topics spanning from struggles associated with online bullying and verbal abuse to coping with stress and anxiety and depression. With the 3 recent deaths by suicide within the streaming community, we'll also explore the warning signs the community members should look out for and the tangible ways that people can help if a family member or a friend is struggling with their mental health. Dr. K is going to help with having grounding the conversation around needing to make space for healing and self-care. And then Brian's going to help talk about the need for the community to create an environment where your favorite athletes and streamers and they can step away and take care of themselves without being penalized or feeling the weight of the pressure. We're also going to be sharing resources from findyourwords.org to learn more about how to support yourself or someone else. Check out findyourwords.org, and it's great because it'll give you information on how to build resilience and talk about anxiety and depression and know the signs when it comes to suicide. We do have a timer that will be dropping it as well as a command. So if you jump in at any point and you want to get this resource, you can either wait for the timer or you can hit the command to be able to get that. Now, let's get right into the conversation. Before we get into, the very deep conversation around mental health, I want to start a little bit more on a lighter note. I think we all have different games that have brought us joy throughout our entire lives, whether it is when we were younger, older, or just the entire span. So I want to ask you guys, what is that game that first created that love that you have for gaming? I want to start with Brian first.
I would say my first real love in gaming was Magic the Gathering. I started playing Magic when I was 13, 12, something like that. I was 13. And it was something that not only was a place where I could interact with people, throughout my life, meeting people, from Magic, traveling and getting to encounter and interact people from all over the world. But it's also just always been, an ongoing intellectual challenge, right? Something that I always felt I could turn to if I had some sort of, just pent up mental energy, or I was looking to find a way to engage myself and keep my mind off something else. That kind of game, collectible card games, for me is something that's always been there.
And Dr. K, what about you?
I'd have to say it's probably StarCraft. So like, this was back when like the internet was young and battle.net was new. And just the fact that like you could play game after game after game and have, unique experiences and it never really got old. And so I just spent tons of hours, met lots of friends, started meeting people that would one day, like who I'd never met, who would come to my wedding and things like that. So it's just a really awesome game that I enjoyed. Probably played way too much.
Oh yeah, we definitely have all those games that have we played way too much. I think for me, the game that really started my joy and love for gaming was it's a classic. Obviously, it's Sonic on the Sega Genesis. That's the game that really got me to really dive into video games and wanting to continue to play. And I realized that this is something that brought me joy and happiness and something that I can connect with not only my brother, but connect with different people, friends, community members, and so forth. And now that we all have our different professions that are tied to gaming, what has that process been like turning a passion that you have into a profession that you utilize gaming in different ways, whether it's for mental health discussions or even if it's casting or commentating? What has that transitional process been like for you? I want to start with Dr. K with this one.
So my transition from like gaming to streaming has been kind of weird. So I used to play a bunch of games growing up, and then basically was kind of like addicted and played way too much. And then sort of like I never really stopped playing games, but then sort of real life pretty hard for a while. I was like, trying. I was like a try hard in real life. And then kind of came back to the gaming world sort of after having gone to medical school and becoming a psychiatrist, because I realized that like the mental health world doesn't understand anything about gaming. I was training to become a psychiatrist and talked to my superiors who were like chief of psychiatry at places like Harvard Medical School, and I would ask them, what do you think about like games, and they don't know anything because they've never played one. The leaders in the field of psychiatry, the experts in the field of neuroscience, are all in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so I think gaming is kind of an entirely new thing. So I realized actually like what I want to do is help gamers because that's what I am and those are my people. And so that's kind of how I came back to gaming, came back to Twitch. And I think games can be really positive and really negative.
And Brian, for you, how has that process been like, especially, with your passion and love for Hearthstone?
So I've really done a bunch of things across various periods of my life that have all been kind of related to gaming in some capacity. I originally I went to college, and at the time I was competing in tournaments and I was traveling to these events. And I even had people who were like, "Why are you even here? Like, you're always going to these tournaments and stuff." But this was before like stuff like Twitch and YouTube and all these pro gaming leagues really existed. So there wasn't really a way to legitimately make a living, at least like any kind of reasonable living competing as a player. So I actually ended up ultimately spending like a year playing semi-professional poker as well as playing Magic for a living, and then got a job offer to work as a game designer actually on one of the games that I had won one of their major tournaments for. So at the time I was actually pretty depressed, frankly, because playing poker online is not exactly a joyful profession. It's pretty mind numbing and spirit crushing when you really boil it down. And then I took this job doing game design, and that was something that I enjoyed for a while. And then I kind of missed competing again. I missed actually playing games. And so much of what I did as a game designer wasn't the things that I loved in gaming. And that was around when Twitch was kind of blowing up, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to give this streaming thing a shot. That was right around when Hearthstone came out, and I started streaming and managed to be successful enough at that I ended up quitting my game design job and just starting streaming full time. So there's it's interesting looking at the challenge that exists kind of in each of those different parts of my kind of gaming career.
And it's interesting too because I think I won't speak for all of us, but there was a time, and it kind of still is this at this point now, where it's like we never planned to have a career in this space. It's like we didn't grow up like, hey, I'm gonna be a pro player this, or I'm gonna be an esports caster, a commentator. Like that wasn't an avenue that was really built for us before. So it was very challenging to kind of continue that process and to continue that passion. But the great thing is, because we have so many different avenues now and it's growing and it's building, more and more younger people can dream instantly and at a young age having a career in this space in some avenue. And, as part of that, I think one of my biggest moments was being part of a big broadcast within the esports and gaming space. And it was amazing, a moment for me. What were some of your guys' biggest moments and biggest breakthroughs where you realize, like, my gosh, like I've always had a passion for gaming. You might have had a dream about working in this space, and then it's like now you finally have it. You got through the door. What was that moment like for you? Starting with Brian.
Well, I have a couple of kind of funny ones. When I was a kid, actually, I was like in high school, and I had like a summer job, like working at an amusement park doing concessions. And then I was playing in like local Magic tournaments at the time, whatever, and I won one of these tournaments, and I won $100. This was like in like 1994, right? And I was like, oh my God, I won like $100. Why am I going to the silly job I have at the concession stand at the amusement park? And I just quit that job. And my mom was like, what's going on? Like, how is this reasonable actions of anyone? And then similarly, I was in college, and I like qualified for one of the Magic Pro Tours. And I was like, okay, I was spending too much time at this like work study that I had. And I'm like, I'm gonna quit my work study and focus on practicing for this tournament. And I got third place in the tournament, and I won $15,000. And my bank statement afterwards was $15,025 because, well, I really needed to do well in that tournament because I quit everything else I was doing to make any money.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Dr. K, what about you? Did you end up your bank account getting to a certain point, or how did that go?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess actually surprisingly similar in some ways. So I mean, I worked, like I said, I was kind of working really hard in the real world, and sort of built a name for myself and kind of had a career where I provided like stress management support and burnout prevention for different organizations, like investment banks, hospital systems. Even did some work with the U.S. military, and so it was like I was becoming like a real like academic kind of try hard sort of person. I was becoming an expert at stuff. And then what I realized is like, I'm not really invested in any of those people. I mean, I like people in general, but what I really am is a gamer at heart, and my people live on Twitch. So I started streaming, and, I'd never heard of a psychiatrist streaming on Twitch, and I wasn't going to play games. I was just going to talk to people. And so, my understanding from Twitch is that the average streamer will have like 20 viewers on average, like after 1 year. And so that's what I was expecting. I was expecting that I'm going to reach out to a couple of people and like help a few people at a time and like maybe teach a little bit about mental health. But Twitch is first and foremost about playing games. And so I was blown away when on our first stream we had like 30 viewers, which was crazy. Like for a first stream ever, to have 30 viewers was like very strange. And then like we went up to 200, and then a couple thousand, and then 10,000 and 40,000 at times. And so I was really stunned. And so much like Brian, I've actually over the last year, I've been in the process of quitting my job. And now I've quit basically. And I have kids, so I couldn't quite just like quit my job at the concession stand. I can't really get my bank account balance down to $25. But it was basically the equivalent where I sort of like built up my professional career, and then I kind of walked away. And I think it's been great. Like, from a professional standpoint, unclear. In Brian's case, it seems like his financial situation improved the more he moved towards gaming. In my case, I'm not quite sure. Jury's still out. But I feel like I'm doing work that I really love. And I think that's what's awesome about the industry is I think a lot of people are in it because we love games and we love the people that play them.
And I mean, and you making that transition has made you a leader in this space. And you guys are leaders, especially when it comes to streamers and when it comes to even the fans across esports and gaming as a whole within the community. So how do you guys cope with the responsibility to appropriately lead or navigate more impressionable communities, especially when it comes to whether it's the game that you're competing in or the overall conversations and discussions around mental health?
You want to take that one, Brian, or you want me to?
Sure. I'll start with this one. I mean, I have always looked at the position that I'm in, as an opportunity rather than a responsibility, right? I feel like when people look at being a public figure as a responsibility that they have to, the community, to the world at large, they can view that as being, like a ton of undue pressure on them that isn't fair. I think like it was like Charles Barkley who, famously, or infamously said, like, I am not a role model, right? And you don't have to be, but you can be. And I look at, where I am as, someone who is in the public eye, who's in the spotlight in the gaming world, as an opportunity to try to set a good example for people, right? To set a something for people to aspire to, whether it's in terms of like my behavior or in terms of trying to take care of myself either mentally or physically. Like earlier this year I started doing fitness streams, right? I was like, you know what, during COVID times it's really important for people to focus on not only their mental health, their physical health, and it can be really difficult to do so. So I want to try to help inspire people to do that too. And I've gotten a lot of messages from people who have told me that I've had like a really positive impact on their lives, outside of like, hey, I like watching your videos, they're cool, I like playing your decks, they're fun. But when someone like earlier this year sent me a message that was like, hey, you inspired me years ago to like work out and I've lost over 100 pounds, and like I feel happier than I ever thought I could possibly feel. And that kind of thing is inherently rewarding, and feeling like you can actually have that impact on people's lives is incredible.
Right.
Definitely is. Dr. K, what about you?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, I view it as a responsibility, not so as an opportunity. And so I mean, I think Brian's point is completely valid. I love his answer. And the way that I sort of deal with the pressure, because I think Brian's right. Like I think part of what we face, especially if you look at streamers and esports professionals, is a lot of pressure, right? There is a lot of responsibility, and that responsibility can weigh on people. So I think that it's useful to learn how to manage whatever you have. And I think Brian sort of figured out a really awesome way where he kind of frames as an opportunity. So he's not weighed down by that pressure. But I still think that if you really listen to his words, he's doing, whether you view it as a responsibility or opportunity, he's using his platform to enact positive change. And in my case, I think we kind of meet in the middle there, because in my case, I do feel like I actually kind of have a responsibility, because I do notice that most people in the gaming industry don't understand mental health pretty well. And I've been really, really privileged and blessed to study a lot of different aspects of mental health, whether it's sort of training to become a monk in India, or going to medical school, or studying neuroscience, to where I think it's actually my responsibility, or I use this word dharma, which means duty. It's the Sanskrit word for duty. So I think I've been given these opportunities, and it's my duty to actually try to help people. And the way that I deal with the pressure is that I don't think about helping the world, because I can't do that. What I try to do is have individual conversations with people. And then what I always try to focus on is like the person that I'm working with in that moment. So whether it be a particular stream, a particular person, a particular group, or a lecture, or teaching yoga or meditation, I focus all of my energy on that one thing, and I don't worry about anything else.
And as you're focusing your energy on that and not worrying about anything else, like how do you stay resilient in terms of maintaining your health and implementing new self-care practices or habits that you've been putting in place to help you with that, so that you're not focusing on just other things and focusing more on making sure that the message that you're conveying and the responsibilities that you have as a leader are good impressions on the community itself. Dr. K, I want to start with you with that one.
Sure. So I think, I know this is going to sound kind of like a weird answer, but I think it starts with awareness. So the first thing that you've got to understand about like stress management and taking care of yourself is, what are you doing to yourself? Right? That's the first question. So what are the different things that you do throughout the day, and what are their effects on you? So what are the things that recharge your battery? What's your equivalent of a mana potion? And what do you spend mana on? Right. So I kind of think about my life as, when I wake up in the morning, I have like a mana bar and it's full. What drains the mana bar? What refills the mana bar? And the more that I kind of think about that, I started to realize that there were some things that were negatively impacting me. Like, for example, I don't look at the viewer counts for any of my streams. And I find, can you hold on just one second? Yeah. Oh, okay, Vera, I'm busy, sweetie. Sorry about that. Um, so I heard someone persistently knocking, and I was afraid that something was wrong. But um, apologies. So, but what I was saying is, I try to think about like what is it that drains my energy, and I think especially for streamers and esports professionals, they do a lot of things without being really aware of what they're doing and not really aware of what the cost is. And so whether it's like, being careful about how much time you spend on social media and reading Twitter, some of the esports professionals that I work with are kind of like really concerned about that because, if they don't do well, they'll like open Twitter and it's almost like this self-torturing kind of activity where you're going to get flamed. And then they're reading people flaming them on the internet until like 2 a.m. So I think it really starts with awareness and then trying to figure out what drains your energy and what doesn't, and then trying to be like pretty proactive at changing those little things.
And Brian, what have you done in terms of self-care practices? Because I mean, you've been out there, competing, and with competing, there does come times where if you don't do well, or if there are people who just may not like you, they may go after you in social media and in chats and everything like that. So, what do you do to kind of like protect yourself in the sense of your mental health? And be resilient during those times, especially during the low times.
I mean, I think that so. For instance, I actually have to echo what Dr. K said about like not looking at your viewer counts on things because that is definitely as someone who streams for a living, something that can be a constant kind of source of stress. Whether it's your viewer counts on your live stream, your YouTube videos, like, oh, am I, how am I doing today compared to yesterday, right? And if you focus on things that are only sort of in your control, because especially stuff like your view count on a Twitch stream when maybe there's a bunch of other new stuff or competing stuff that has nothing to do with you, or like something that like with like the YouTube algorithm that's easy to get buried by and frustrated by, all you can really focus on is what you're gonna do, right? I love that Dr. K mentioned Dharma because when I did go to college, my degree is actually in philosophy and religious studies, and I've joked that it's had two uses in my life. One of them is to be able to sort of keep my mind at ease when things go wrong when I'm playing games, right? I get unlucky and I can be like, all right, well, my primary thing I can control here is how I react to that. The other usage is to understand the references that Chidi makes in The Good Place. But other than that, it's had no use in my entire life. But or that Dr. K makes apparently on this podcast. But yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things is to really just focus on what you can control, because there's a lot that is outside your control, and you need to, in order to be able to, do this sort of thing, especially in card games, right? In card games or in team games where maybe your teammate makes a mistake and causes your team to lose, and that's completely outside of your control. And in order to be able to be, resilient enough to keep going in this sort of industry where there are so many things that may be outside your control, or even if you make your own mistake, to be like, okay, I made that mistake, right? And all I can do now is move forward from that mistake. I can't look back and be like, I should have used my Zonias, or whatever. Like if you just do that, if you focus on the things that are outside your control, especially the things that are outside your control in the past, you're just going to bury yourself deeper in sort of negative mental space, and it's not going to get you anywhere.
Oh yeah, and another thing I've also kind of learned is that sometimes that the things that are said to you or done to you is not necessarily a representation of you. It's usually it's a projection or
Oh,
feeling of how that person feels or what they're going through. Because sometimes when people are upset, they may say things to other people because they're projecting that feeling, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's you. And sometimes a little bit of empathy and understanding can go a long way to kind of help you with processing some of those things. Dr. K, I know you were jumping in and add additional thing.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of what Brian said because I think it's an awesome answer. So, like, just to toss out a little bit more Sanskrit, which I think is basically what Brian talked about. So, there's this concept called karma fard. So, karma means action, and fard means fruit. And one of the key things that I try to teach people is that as a human being, you're entitled to your actions, but not the fruits of your actions. And this is really bizarre because this is not what society judges us for. So what part of I think what's going on like with like the gaming generation is that we tend to be taught that our value is based on results, right? It's like, what grade did you get in the test? What's your grade in the class? Did you win the tournament? Did you get first place, second place, or third place? So everywhere we look, people judge us for results. And that's what we value. And that's what we start to think is important. And that's what we start focusing on, which is the exact opposite of what we control. So I know this sounds really bizarre, but it's impossible for me to get an A on a test. What I can do is study for a test, but whether I get an A or not is actually not in my control. And so one of the biggest ways that I think you can kind of deal with stress and kind of like manage this pressure, like kind of Brian is saying, is that it's not his choice. He actually has no control over who watches his stream, right? All he can do is show up on stream and try to produce the best product possible, to produce the best stream possible, the most entertaining stream possible, the most helpful stream possible. And as long as you devote yourself to your actions, I think the results tend to come. And it's when people start to focus on the viewer count that they actually start to stress themselves out. The more stressed they get, the less fun they are to watch. And then the more their viewer count plummets. And when they watch their viewer count plummet, they stress themselves out even more. And it turns into a vicious cycle where they end up like completely burnt out.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I think another thing too is like, I know typically in the industry too, when it comes to building your brand and whether it's sponsorships, getting signed to a team, it's like you said, everything's dictated on numbers, whether it's streaming numbers, your social media numbers. But even in my experience, like realizing just with broadcasts, right? Not even streaming broadcasts, but in broadcasting, we typically won't worry entirely about like, okay, what's being said, certain things that are being said in chat, or we just kind of focus in on putting the best broadcast forth. So then the viewers will be happy with the product itself. And so it's interesting how we focus on things that we can control and not what we can't control, but being self-aware of the things that we can't control to better control what we can control. And it's so interesting just how full circle that whole concept is.
Yeah.
And I know you guys mentioned throughout this session philosophy being a big component of what drives your guys' mindset. Is there any other additional factor or person or mentor who has helped you learn, especially when it comes to self-care practices, mental health, being self-aware? Was there anything else or anyone else that kind of assists you guys with that? Brian, I want to start with you.
I don't know that I necessarily would say that I had any particular mentor in terms of like my my perspectives on mental health and whatnot. Like I said, my degree is in philosophy and religious studies, and I think that had did a lot to shape my perspective in terms of these things. I think that like Sartrean existentialism, in terms of like the sort of fundamental human condition being thrownness into the world, right? That like we don't actually have control over the conditions of our lives. We can only control the way that we react to them. Is really like a core philosophy and like the way that I approach kind of everything. And I think that that's really important in like I said, especially in gaming when there's tons of things that are not under your control.
Yeah, Dr. K, what is, I guess for you, I'm kind of going to switch this question up a little bit. What is something within your practice that you've learned during your time that you've implemented a lot more into your life?
So I'd say like this is kind of related, but I'd say like when you say practice, do you mean like clinical practice or like gaming stuff? Let me just clarify.
Clinical. I mean, you know what? Actually, it could be gaming practice and clinical practice because I feel like there are moments of learning in so many different avenues in so many different spaces, and even especially when it comes to gaming, that I feel like the conversation about learning and coping within gaming is something that's talked about as much. So either one is completely fine.
Yeah, so I'd say like probably the biggest thing is in understanding how expectations tend to lead to disappointment. And so, I kind of like when I'm working with pro gamers and I'll kind of ask them a question, let's say I'm going to just use a MOBA analogy, for example. So let's say like you go 2-0 in your lane. So like you're up 2 kills against your opponent versus going 0-2, which is that you're down 2 kills. In which scenario are you more likely to tilt? And it turns out that you're more likely to tilt if you're up 2 kills. Because when you're ahead in a game, you start to think, I got this, I'm going to win, and you start to create an expectation of winning. And once you create that expectation of winning, when something doesn't go your way, like let's say you end up with, dying once in lane or something like that, then you're still ahead, but you're way more likely to be like upset because you didn't expect that thing to happen. Whereas if you're 0 and 2 and then you get 1 kill, even though absolutely you're in a worse position than 2 and 1, you feel so much better. And that's because you expected to lose. And so like I think a big part of what I've learned and this kind of goes back to streaming and other stuff, is to wake up every day and try to let go of expectation. Right? It doesn't matter whether you did a good job yesterday or you did a bad job yesterday. You can't expect what's going to happen today, and to just kind of focus on like doing the best job that you can, and don't worry about what should happen. Because when people get really bent out of shape, they worry about what they should be doing or what should happen. So it's really to step away with the entire word of should.
I actually kind of had a similar. Sorry, I just
No,
want to.
go ahead.
I kind of had an experience like when I was competing early on when I was competing in Magic professionally. The very beginning of playing in a lot of like high level tournaments, I would consistently get to the point in a tournament where like I would be nearly making the top 8, nearly like getting a great finish, and then if maybe I would make a mistake or maybe I would get unlucky and kind of fall out of that possible placing. And then I would completely lose focus because I was so focused. I was mentally so sort of set on, I'm going to make top 8. I'm going to make top 8. I'm going to win this. And then when it kind of got derailed a little bit, it derailed entirely. And it took a lot for me to get out of that mental space. It took a lot over time for me to stop losing, my focus completely once I was out of contention to necessarily win the tournament, right? Or, maybe I like lost the round I thought I should have won, just like Dr. K was saying, and that really threw me out of the right mental space. And that's definitely something that's super important, especially, as a competitor, to really reset in your brain, because if something goes wrong and then that means everything goes wrong after that because you just kind of like lose your focus mentally, that just means you're never going to be able to be successful long term.
Brian, I want to ask you a follow up question to that, because you talk about as a competitor resetting, right? And the resetting process doesn't just happen in competition. There is that transitional moment where competitors may transition from competing to casting, or they go from casting and then no longer at casting. And for you, for that reset and that decision making component, how did you make the decision to leave casting Hearthstone, and how did it impact your mental health? And was there any struggles of like identity struggles or transitional struggles or what's next struggles that you kind of had to cope with during those moments?
I mean, I think that when I stopped competing, it was more just a matter of the nature of competition, of what went into being a competitor in Magic wasn't something that I was that interested in anymore. It wasn't that I didn't want to compete anymore, but like at the time when I sort of stepped back from competing to focus on streaming and such, competing in Magic in particular involved a ton of travel, which obviously wouldn't be the case this year, but was something that really like I found that all the circumstances surrounding the actual competition was something that I was no longer really happy with. Right. And it wasn't something, I had been successful enough that I no longer felt like compelled to kind of put myself through this to prove myself to people. And, I was like, okay, this is something else that I can do when I sort of discovered streaming, something else that I can do that allows me to feel joy about playing games. Without necessarily having stuff like, okay, I'm waking up at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. to catch a flight to like Lincoln, Nebraska to go compete in a tournament. And that I think was really more than anything, a lot of focus. But then even when I started streaming, I started occasionally playing in events, competing in Hearthstone events, and there was sort of this, there definitely was sort of this expectation from a lot of the community. It's like, oh, well, you're a pro Magic player, you're a Magic Hall of Famer, like you just win every tournament you enter or something like that. And it's like, oh, that's not really realistic, right? And it's also just how I think part of why I also kind of reframed the approach that I took to Hearthstone. My streams tend to be focused on like trying to make cool and interesting decks work competitively, right? But not necessarily focused on like the absolute highest level of competition. Part of that I think does have them to do with like I don't want, if I were to focus on like trying to be as competitive, as I possibly could be, would that somehow undermine people's idea of me if I wasn't successful, right? Of like the past experience that I had as a top competitive Magic player. So there's definitely like a intentionality to like that not being what I do. A big part of it is that I just have more fun doing what I do now, right? Than I would if I was just like trying to play whatever metagame decks to the top of the ladder. But some part of it at least is definitely like, not wanting to sort of undermine the expectations that people would have for me if I wouldn't be successful.
Yeah. And Dr. K, I have a question for you, actually, from one of the viewers in the chat section. Before we get into conversation about suicide prevention, I just want to reiterate the fact that, again, this episode later on, we will be discussing suicide prevention and recent streamers' deaths by suicide, which may be triggering for some viewers. So I wanted to give that disclaimer. And once again, if you like more resources and information to help you with building resilience and talking about anxiety, depression, and knowing the signs for suicide, you can head on over to findyourwords.org. There's a command and timer for that website link. So, Dr. K, we actually have a question from Senibaj. How does one improve focusing on a task instead of the outcome? And I find a lot of what hinders me mentally is the tendency to overthink.
So that's two questions. I know there's only one question, but how does one focus on the task instead of the outcome? And once again, the first thing is to notice that most of what motivates us is usually the outcome, right? It also depends a little bit on what your upbringing is, what your cultural upbringing is, kind of the kind of values that are instilled in you. So I'm actually the son of two doctors. So like when I was growing up, I was sort of like genetically pre-med. And it was just sort of assumed that I was going to go to medical school and become a doctor. And so, I think you have to be a little bit careful because I think our society conditions us to look at outcomes because that's what we do, right? It's about grades. Like, where'd you go to college? Like, what's your GPA? Like, how much money do you make? It's all about outcomes. And so it's hard because it's sort of an uphill battle. But what I'd really encourage people to do is just really focus on the present. So, if you want to work on your expectations, it's about restraining the focus of your mind. And what that means is that your mind is going to do kind of what it's looking at. And so if we look at something like social media, right? So like if you watch your viewership count, there's no way that your mind is not going to think about, oh, my viewers are down or my viewers are up or whatever. And instead, so if you distract your mind by giving it that stimulus, then it's going to think about that thing. So what I really encourage people to do is control the stimulus of your mind, at least until you learn how to train it, and then meditate to learn how to train your mind. But if you really want to focus on the action itself, that's what you should try to create, kind of a stimulus-free environment where you're kind of like focusing on the thing.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I guess this kind of ties into another question that another viewer has that I thought kind of what you said leads into this. It's from haha_12_BTW. This is actually for both of you. Brian, I can start with you and then go to Dr. K. Before you sit down in your chair to start gaming, and more specifically for competitive gaming, what mindset should you be in? How do you set the right mindset to be prepared to compete?
So back when I competed regularly, I actually had a pre-match ritual, which involved listening to music. Before every single match that I sat down to play, actually before every tournament, going back even further, I would pick a song for that tournament. And the whole idea of picking a song for a tournament was that I wanted to have some just like constant refrain that I would kind of go back to between rounds, and I would pick something that I put on my headphones, I'd listen to the music, and the idea was that it would get me focused on right now, right? It would get me instead of being focused on looking at the standings to see what place I'm in, where I'm at the tournament, what I need to do. It would refocus me to where I'm at right now and kind of try and get all those distractions away. And a lot of people have different sorts of rituals, whether it's music, whether it's like, stretching, touching things. People have also like whether they're rituals that are intended to reset them mentally or whatever. And I think that having something like that was definitely valuable for me. And it allows you to really focus on now instead of like before, when maybe things didn't go your way, maybe they did. So you're instead of focusing on the past or the future, you're focusing on the present and like the game you're actually about to play. And I think that's really important.
And Dr. K, how can someone prepare their mindset, and what are some practices or things that you think that one can do to prepare their mind for competitive gaming?
So I think the first and foremost thing is breathing. So this is something that, like, I think one of the crazy things is that we've stopped teaching people how they work. Like, how do you prepare your mindset? How does the mind work? How does the body work? How does focus work? And one of the simplest things to understand is that your breathing and your mood are linked, like one and one. So if you think about it, when you're angry, you start breathing a particular way. When you're sad, you start breathing a particular way. When you're anxious, you start breathing a particular way. When you have a panic attack, you breathe a particular way. And so the main question is it a two-way street? Is it your mood that controls your breathing, or does your breathing also control your mood? And as it turns out, and we kind of all know this, right? We say that, like, if someone's freaking out, you tell them, okay, take 3 deep breaths. And like, why do we say that? Is it just a cultural thing? It actually turns out that it's physiologically the case. Especially, I think, with the key thing here is that the length of your exhalation correlates with the tranquility of your mind. And so if you slow down how you breathe, especially with the exhalation, you're more likely to be in a calm mind and sort of like mentally prepare yourself for game day. And the more kind of worried you get, the more you get stuck in the past, kind of like what Brian is talking about. If you think too much in the future, you're going to get you're going to get expectation. If you think too much in the past, you're going to get caught up in regret. I should have done this. Oh, if I should have done this, if I had done this. And so when you kind of focus on your breath in the present moment and learn particular breathing practices, there are scientific studies that literally show that if you breathe in a particular way, it balances the level of adrenaline in your blood. And so if you're too hyped up, it'll calm you down. And if you're too sluggish, it'll actually increase your adrenaline levels so that your focus is kind of like at an optimal level where you're alert, you're focused, you're prepared, but you're not like hyper focused or not like overly ramped up. And so I'd say breath is like the most important thing.
And with that, breath being one way to kind of set your mindset. Another Twitch chat question, Joshua Sun Yu. It's kind of similar, but he's, the individual's looking for different practices. How do you reset mentally after something goes wrong or an expectation goes wrong? And also, what are some practices to let go of those expectations and learning how to not hold on to those expectations? Dr. K, I'll start with you, and Brian, want to go after to you, just like go to you to go to you for you to discuss how you let go of some of your expectations as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll give you kind of two answers. One is there are particular breathing practices that you can literally do that will help you let go of expectation. And I know it sounds bizarre, but if we like tunnel down for a second, getting caught up in expectation is going to lead to a particular amount of suffering and emotion, right? Like that's what we mean. Like, oh, I like regret something. And so that emotion of regret is going to cause that psychological thought is going to create a change in your brain, which in turn is going to create a change in your physiology. And you can actually do particular breathing practices to affect your physiology, which in turn affects your brain, which in turn affects your psychology. It's a two-way street. So you can literally do certain breathing practices to let go of the effects of expectation. The second thing that I think a lot of gamers need to learn is how to grieve. Right? So if we think about what grieving is the process of like letting go of what you've already lost. And what I find really holds people back is when they get stuck on that which is gone. And then they can't kind of move past it. And I think as a society, we don't teach people like how to grieve, right? We don't even know. If I were to tell people, oh, well, you should grieve, the next question you're going to get in chat is, how do I grieve? Because we don't teach that stuff. But like sort of acknowledging that that time has passed and that, tomorrow is gone. I mean, yesterday is gone, but that tomorrow is coming and you can still do something today.
And Brian,
Learn to grieve.
Yeah, definitely. Breathing does help in so many different ways. I mean, even in whether it's casual gaming or even like in traditional sports, they typically teach you how you need breathing as part of not only excelling, but it's also about staying focused, like you said. Brian, for you, how have you been able to kind of let go of certain expectations, especially when you're competing? And where did you learn how to be able to be okay with letting those expectations go? Or understanding and letting go of moments where things were going wrong.
I think in a lot of cases, my response would tend to be to just find some way to take my focus elsewhere, right? Because if you just like, say I just lost a big match, right? And I still have another big match yet to play. I've like just gotten up and left the tournament area and gone like taking a walk, right? Taking a long walk, listening to that same song that I would listen to throughout the tournament to give myself even more time to reset, right? When you have that opportunity, because stronger, stronger sort of stronger emotions, stronger instances, where you feel like you are kind of, as Dr. K was saying, kind of stuck in the past that you got to let go of. It can require more than just like, okay, I'm going to put my music on and get ready for the next round, right? It gives you, like getting up and moving around, sort of physically being in a different place, focusing on, a different environment can help you kind of snap out of feeling like you are still stuck in that thing that happened moments ago or however long ago that's still distracting you.
Yeah, and we talked about different aspects of dealing and coping with stress, expectations, failures. But what are some of the other aspects and conversations in mental health, both as casual gamers or professional esports athletes, that we should stress as individuals and teams that we should prioritize, and the kinds of mental health conversations that we should be having? What are those that we need to put at the forefront, Dr. K?
So, what are the conversations that are important to have in gaming about mental health? Is that the question?
Yeah, what are the aspects or conversations of mental health that we need to prioritize in gaming, whether it's for casual or pro players?
So one of the big ones that I do a lot with pro players is actually like team dynamics and how to communicate. So I think this is another thing that we're not really formally taught is that there are like particular ways that you can communicate feedback and sort of understanding your feelings, letting other people know how you feel so that you can sort of be like listened to and heard and understood. And most of like the conflict that you have in a game, whether you're playing with pubs or you're like an esports team, comes down to communication, right? Like what's frustrating you? Why do you feel like you're off your game? And like once people understand who you are and where you're coming from, they can sort of support you appropriately. But in order to get the right kind of support, other people have to know like in what way to support you. So I think like communication is probably like first and foremost, like the most important conversation that we need to have.
And Brian, for you, what kind of conversation, as someone who's has experience being a competitive player, what's a certain aspect of that life when it comes to mental health that we need to prioritize?
I think one of the most important things for anyone who wants to be a competitive player is learning how to lose, because you're going to do a lot of it, right? Like if you're competing and you're not the absolute best, you're going to lose a lot. And learning to be able to accept that and to process that and to learn from that is extremely important. There was like I forget how long ago, like 6 months, a year ago, there was like a ninja tweet about like, the, just a game mindset and how he said that, oh, this is like it's a weak mindset and all this. And, I replied to it and, basically saying that I think it's really important that people have the appropriate mindset toward losing, which isn't that I'm angry that I lost all the time. I'm always angry to lose because that's what winners are. Winners want to win and they're angry if they lose. Like, no, no. Like winners want to win, and you can look at a loss and be like, okay, how do I prevent that from happening in the future? What do I do differently? But always coming away from losing, as someone who is angry and is resentful and is upset and justifies like raging and throwing your keyboard and breaking your mouse or whatever, is an absolutely unhealthy perspective to have. And I think that that's something that a lot of kind of popular gaming culture can sometimes make people believe is the case. I think it's really important to kind of correct that and to have a healthy attitude toward both winning and losing in games.
Yes, you know, the mindset, setting your mindset and having that mindset where you're able to be able to handle the great of times and the worst of times and be able to control that, ultimately is a powerful thing as an individual to have. But it's about having these coping mechanisms, having these conversations that allow someone to get to that point. But I've noticed, you know, as well, because of COVID, a lot of people have been dealing with the lack of in real life interaction, communication, even human touch in some capacity. So, Brian, for you, you know, how do you, I guess, do you appreciate being able to play games and stream, in whether it's someone face to face versus just online, and has streaming been a way for you to still be able to connect with people even though it's so hard for us to do that in some ways now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fact that I spend every day sort of talking to a bunch of people, right? It makes the environment that we're in feel less isolating, right? Like I live, it's just me and my dog here, right? And I've spent 6 months, very, very, very rarely seeing other people. But the fact that I'm able to stream and I'm able to connect with people every day on my stream has been very helpful in terms of not feeling like I'm just totally cut off from the world in a very real way. And also the sorts of games that I've played at different times are also like have different impact on my mental state, right? Like playing Among Us recently, despite it being a game about deceiving your friends, has actually been great for me, because it's both sort of reconnected me with people who I don't necessarily play Hearthstone or League of Legends or whatever with, who have been parts of my life at various points, and it's also just like fundamentally a game about socializing and talking to people, right? You're having conversations, in whether it's in the actual game or between games when you're discussing how the round went and things like that. I think it's actually like kind of the perfect game for the state of the world right now, in the sense that people are looking to communicate and connect with people, and it's something that like is fundamentally about that. It's not like just sort of an incidental portion of the game. It's not like you're just talking about your strategy in the game. The game is about talking to people. So
Yeah, and Dr. K, you know, for you, you know, what have you noticed in terms of just how streaming, and more specifically, streaming has been instrumental in terms of people staying connected with each other, and how does this all relate to mental health, especially during this COVID time? Like I said, it's very hard for us to connect and have some sort of intimacy and different connections with different people during this time. So what have you noticed during this whole period?
Yeah, so it's been wild, Aaron. So just in my psychiatric practice, things are falling apart. I used to deal with maybe like one or two emergencies a year, like true emergencies, like suicide attempts or something like that. And now I'm kind of dealing with one every 2 weeks. And so the effect on the COVID impact on mental health is profound. So the CDC put out a bulletin that suggested that depression was like 30% worse. A more recent study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association suggests that it's not 30% worse; it's 300% worse, and that symptoms of depression are just skyrocketing. And so, the world is like mentally, the world is just getting way, way worse. We are seeing upticks in suicidality and suicidal behavior. There was a CDC bulletin about that too. Um, and the funny thing, and I think this is what's actually really cool about being a gamer, is that actually as a community, we're pretty resilient to a lot of this stuff. So I think that, if you think about someone who doesn't play video games and doesn't socialize much online, they feel way more isolated. So I think one of the really fascinating things about gaming and Twitch and stuff like that is that in some ways it isolates people. So you kind of think about someone who's like plays games all day and like lives alone and doesn't go out much. And that's sort of isolating, but it's actually like the internet is a wonderful source of connection and bizarrely a terrible source of isolation. It's a place where there's a lot of toxicity and a lot of camaraderie. And so bizarrely, I think that, we sort of have the solutions in front of us. And it involves things like this podcast where, now we have a way to discuss mental health. We have places, support resources. Brian is like, teaching people how to get healthy on a stream before he plays Hearthstone. And so we've actually got like a lot of tools in our tool belt. I kind of think about COVID as sort of the final boss, but we're also like super high level and we can handle it.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Like you said, I've noticed kind of like the difference between my friends who are gamers and then my friends who aren't. And then those who aren't, how they actually have bought consoles and they've gotten PC equipment just to start streaming and playing to have that sense of community. But during this time too, before we get into this topic, like I said, I want to reinforce that we are discussing suicide prevention for the rest of this podcast. And there have been recent streamers' deaths by suicide that may be triggering to the viewers. So just want to put that disclaimer out there. But we've seen, like I said, we've had 3 recent deaths by suicide by streamers. What are some warning signs, Dr. K? Since you're seeing such an uptick in this thing, what warning signs should people look out for if they're worried about someone, and what can they do to help?
So that's a great question. And my answer is going to be a little bit weird. So the short answer is that there really aren't warning signs that people should be looking out for. So the overwhelming research on suicide suggests that people who actually make serious suicide attempts do so, 70% of them do so within 5 minutes of the actual attempt. So we all have this kind of idea, which is that like, someone kind of like decides to commit suicide and they plan things out and then they put their affairs in order and stuff like that. Whereas the overwhelming majority of people who attempt suicide do so very impulsively. That doesn't mean that there isn't anything that we can do, but I want to be very clear that I don't think that there are particular warning signs that people should be looking out for. And if you see this particular thing, then that means that this person is going to commit suicide. Instead, what I would tell people is that the people that you interact with. And if you if you feel like they're struggling in some way, just ask them about it. And in fact, even if you don't think they're struggling in some way, just ask them about it. So I think the thing about that question, Erin, is that implies that action should only be taken if you see X, Y, or Z. And that's a premise that I'd actually like to combat. And I'd say that now is the perfect time to reach out to all of the people that you're close to, and even half of the people that you're not. And just ask them, like, hey man, like the next time you're in a lobby with one of your friends, say like, hey man, how are you actually doing? Are you like struggling? Is there any way that I can support you? And I think it's not so much to be reactive to a warning sign, but be proactive and just check in with people about how they're doing. Let them know that you're there to talk and you're there to support them, if they're struggling in some way. I think that's really the real answer.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that. Like you said, there's so many people that are struggling during this time, and if there's any way that anyone can help in any shape or form, we will definitely do what we can to help our loved ones. Now, we're getting close towards the end. I want to end with just a last thought from both of you guys around mental health. What is the one thing that you want people to take away from this conversation that they can continue forth with further conversations with their friends, or just continue practicing some of the things that we talked about in here? What's the one takeaway from this episode? Brian, I want to start with you.
Oh, now I'm like feel like I'm put in the spot here. No, I mean, I do think that both Dr. K and I point out the importance of not focusing on the things that are outside of your control, right? And especially in a time in the world when there is so much that is outside of our control that can be really stressful. You can't control the fact that there is currently a global pandemic happening. You can't control the fact that different people are reacting to it differently than you are, and you may feel like they should. You can only control your own actions and your own perspective and your own reactions to the world around you. And I think that that's just a really important thing to keep in mind, especially when things are as tough as they are right now.
Dr. K?
Yeah, so I'd say a couple things. The first is that life is a multiplayer game. It's not a single player game. And if there's one takeaway to be had, it's that don't do it alone. So anything regarding mental health, whether you're concerned if like you have a problem with mental health or your friends have a problem with mental health, it's not a single player game. It's a multiplayer game. And when I see people sort of really struggle with mental health and when I see bad outcomes, it's people who are isolated. And so the first thing that I'd encourage people to do is just reach out to someone or anyone. You don't have to you don't have to know that you have a problem to go see a psychiatrist. I think one of the biggest things that people forget is that a big responsibility of mental health professionals isn't just treatment, it's also evaluation. So go get evaluated and just like go get it checked out. The second thing that's kind of related to this, so we have a saying at Healthy Gamer, which is like one of the central mottos for our coaching program and just us as an organization, is don't worry alone. Okay to worry. Everyone has worries. Just don't worry alone. So if you're worried about something, just don't do it alone, man. Just like reach out to someone, let someone else know, like, hey, like I'm really worried about this, or I'm afraid I could be depressed, or the pandemic is hitting me pretty hard. And remember that it's like a multiplayer game. And that like the awesome thing about Twitch, about the gaming community is that we are a community, right? Like we're all over the place. You can connect with other people. Games bring people together. And
Yes,
so take advantage of that. That's one of the biggest tools in our tool belt.
it
So
is.
play the game multiplayer. Don't wipe single player because that's what happens.
Multiplayer it is, and we will continue the multiplayer here with Cloud9 with future episodes. And also to learn more about how to support yourself or someone else, check out findyourwords.org, which has a lot of great information on how to build resilience and talk about anxiety and depression and signs for suicide and just additional information that should help you guys through the process. I want to end this episode. It was great talking to you guys. I had so much information. I'm hoping that everyone who tuned in had something to take away and learn, and also some information that they can help to take to their friends. Because, like I said, Dr. K, it's not a single player mode; it's a multiplayer mode. Thank you so much, Dr. K. Thank you, Brian, so much. Viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. I also have to give thanks to Cloud9 and Cloud9's partner, Kaiser Permanente. Appreciate everyone for tuning into our episode. But we will have more. The next episode is going to be coming in October. So make sure you tune into Cloud9's social media to find out who our next guests are. And once again, my name is Erin Ashley Simon, and you're tuning into Presence of Mind. Catch you guys later.